Just recently, we took a look at my grandma's old PC, a Dell XPS 8300 from 2011, and tried to force it to game. The poor little thing worked itself to the bone as we cruelly tried to run games from its era and also some from 2016. It wasn't exactly easy on the sad excuse for a graphics card installed inside. The Radeon HD 6450 with 1GB of VRAM. Some would even call this a display adapter, a pair of words that make me physically unwell to hear. Fortunately, the PC gods are kind, and they had a different plan for our Dell XPS 8300. Today, we're asking ourselves, can we supercharge this 15-year-old Dell Media PC using upgraded parts to make extreme modern gaming possible? I think the answer might shock you, so let's find out. Well, for starters, this old beauty is going to need some serious upgrades, but we've got to think them through carefully. Dell OEM motherboards from this era aren't exactly known for being future-proof, starting with the CPU, and on paper the XPS 8300 should easily take a 3rd generation Ivy Bridge processor, like the i7-3770. They share the exact same LGA 1155 socket, and Intel's official spec sheet says the H67 chipset is up to the job, but in reality, trying to install one is a sad, lonely road. It turns out Dell decided to abandon BIOS updates for this motherboard after November 2011, and with Ivy Bridge releasing in 2012, this board never received the necessary microcode and management engine updates required to get a shiny new 3rd gen processor running under the hood. It wasn't for a lack of trying from the community either. Dell forums from back in the day show users like Baggerlook desperately asking why his 3rd gen chip wouldn't work. Sadly, he was given a bleak reminder that life can be a cruel mistress. By Chris, a Dell community manager. Baggerlook tried to manually hack the BIOS to force 3rd gen support, but to cut a long story short, we're stuck on good old 2nd gen Sandy Bridge. But that doesn't mean we can't nab ourselves a beefy upgrade. Going back to Chris's heartbreaking reply to our friend in time, Baggerlook, we discovered the exact processor we needed, sitting right at the top of the compatibility pile. The Intel Core i7-2600. This is a 4-core, 8-threaded beast, and it's the exact CPU I desperately wanted when I first got into tinkering and building computers. This chip is very nearly the best processor you can possibly drop into this system. There is an i7-2700K out there, but it's more expensive for what is really a microscopic performance bump. Plus, there's absolutely no way to overclock on this lockdown Dell motherboard. So the fact that this more expensive chip can be overclocked means nothing to us. Our i7-2600 came in at around £16 or 20 USD, and for upgrading a system trapped in the 2nd generation of Intel, it's the obvious choice. When doing some additional research on this CPU, I saw so many comments on Reddit about the processor claiming it's basically useless for gaming now. I think we can prove them wrong. Next up, and the currency we'll all be spending when the Terminators take over, sticks of RAM. In its original configuration, this Dell was rocking a measly 6GB of DDR3. Now, we can't change the fact that the motherboard locks our RAM speeds to a steady old 1333 MHz. High speeds by today's standards or not, we can give ourselves a much larger pool of memory to work with, so we threw in 16GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR3. The installation went smoothly, and honestly, the coloured heatsinks look surprisingly premium inside our old sun-damaged XPS. 16GB should be enough, right? Well, actually, we'll have to come back to that later. Let's move on to the single biggest upgrade that this PC desperately cried out for. A new graphics card. Replacing that old 1GB HD 6450 came with a few strict rules. First, we needed a card that plays ball with an elderly legacy motherboard. Second, it couldn't draw excessive power because we're trying to keep the stock Dell 470W power supply. And finally, it needed to balance well with our i7-2600 and not be massively overkill. Taking all that into account, we went with the bulletproof GTX 1060 6GB. A 2016 card but still perfectly capable. A quick shout out to HumbleGamer1503 who called this exact GPU in the comments on the last video. In my opinion, this card is the absolute sweet spot. It's got just enough VRAM to still handle a surprising amount of modern games, and it leaves us with a tiny bit of power headroom to overclock on the old power supply. To be honest, it's actually a decently strong card, so if you just look compared to the old one, it's an absolutely colossal difference. It's like jumping out of a dodgy old three-wheeler and getting into a supercar. Well, or maybe a Honda. Something decently powerful but very reliable. rounding out the interior upgrades, we slapped in an extra 250GB SSD, bringing us up to 500GB total, a bare minimum for installing games in 2026. So, we've sorted out the engine, but what about the aesthetics? How will people know this is an extreme gaming build without a gaming emblem and some truly cursed RGB shamelessly slapped onto the build? Let's put our new and improved Dell back in its rightful place and admire it in all its glory. Beautiful. Next up, I got the new graphics drivers installed, but before going further, I just need to put on a small overclock. We had to make sure we're getting every last drop of performance out of the GPU. Yes, the power supply might not exactly be jumping for joy at that news, but in a modest tweak, we should avoid turning Grandma's old PC into a smoke machine. And without further ado, it's now time to see what this fully spec'd out 2011 Dell XPS can achieve with its new lease of life. So I thought the best way to do this would be to start from games from the PC's original era and then swiftly progress to some of the most popular titles of the modern era, including 2026. That way, we can truly understand if this PC is a resilient veteran refusing to surrender or an early retiree that tapped out years ago. Let's check all this out in the gaming showdown. So for the oldest game from 2009 and our competitive online experience, we went back to Modern Warfare 2 Online. Before the upgrade, we required a literal potato boost setting to be able to play this in 1080p, but now we're easily hitting 200 to 300 FPS at maxed out settings, without really even breaking a sweat. One thing that hasn't got any better is my ability on the game though. Swiftly moving on to 2010, we're revisiting Fallout New Vegas. This is oddly fitting since internet rumours indicate a sequel or remaster might finally be in the works. This fan favourite chugged along at 720p low last time, but despite its famously janky engine limitations, we handled it at max settings in 1080p now. It didn't mean I had an easier time taking down the bandits, but it does mean that I could get wasted in style. The frame rate fluctuated a fair bit because Gamebryo engine doesn't always play well unless you mod it to work with modern APIs. Next up, and pushing forward to 2012, Far Cry 3 runs as smooth as silk at 1080p higher settings. The CPU was also hitting its absolute single core limit, as seen by the second number here. If the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, I'm happy to keep coming back to this game, especially with it running so well. Hitting 88 miles per hour and moving ahead in time again to 2014, we loaded up the sequel to our last game, Far Cry 4. Oddly, it's a game that I've never really got around to playing, but this experience might just convince me to do a full playthrough on Grandma's old rig. At maxed out 1080p, the visual leap Ubisoft achieved here with this installment is quite stunning, and we enjoyed a smooth 70 to 80 FPS in general gameplay with similar hardware utilization to the previous game.
Avalanche! Take cover!
Dying Light from 2015 was a slowed down low-res mess on the old specs. The type of game where it was impressive that the GPU even held on at all. But now it's back from the dead, looking great and giving us anywhere from 70 to 100 FPS. Utilization on both our new processor and graphics card was excellent. The performance overlay graph indicates a few micro dips, but these weren't really noticeable in game, and this was extremely playable and fun as always. Another year on, and ID Software gave us Doom 2016. This game was completely slowed down when the PC was still at grandma spec, but I'm pleased to report it's now a buttery smooth motion video, bringing us 60 to 100 FPS at max settings. Not bad compared to our original baseline of 360p and everything set to low with my expectations even lower. Just look at these two side by side. Now, if you're an eagle-eyed viewer, you probably noticed in some of the gameplay we had 28GB of RAM installed in our system. As I was benchmarking, I realised we were getting dangerously close to our system memory limits, especially for a heavy game from 2023 that we'll be testing later. And because I promised you all a supercharged PC, I went out to my local CEX and picked up 4 sticks of 8GB DDR3 to give us an even bigger pool of RAM. But there was an issue with one of them and CEX had no more in stock. It likes the 2 HyperX sticks. Doesn't like the Crucial. Thankfully, we can use Intel's Flex mode here. By installing 3 8GB sticks alongside one of the surviving 4GB sticks, we get 24GB running in fast dual channel and the remaining 4GB running in single channel. Since the system will likely never cross that 24GB threshold anyway, it's absolutely fine for us. I also had to correct a great injustice that I'd committed earlier. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to install an Asus brand Republic of Gamers emblem on a Dell PC. Luckily, this shiny Dell Alienware badge arrived from Amazon, and I actually think it suits the system really well in a 2015 gamers fantasy kind of way. Anyway, back to putting the system through the gauntlet with the games, and we've now hit 2018 and 2 excellent and exciting titles to test out. The first of the 2 is Wreckfest, an insanely entertaining chaotic racer featuring some of the best real-time vehicle physics in gaming. It also features me crawling over the line in a highly laughable 8th place finish. I thought this game would completely devour our RAM, but it was perfectly content hovering around 7GB. The graphics card was fully pinned at 100%, while our CPU didn't struggle at all. Not bad considering we're playing on max settings on a system mostly built 7 years prior to the game's release. Our second 2018 test is Kingdom Come Deliverance on ultra high settings. The game menu literally throws up a warning saying this preset is reserved for future systems, which is ironic because ours is firmly a past system. With HD textures enabled, watching medieval peasants walk around the village centre dropped us to a cinematic 20 to 30 FPS, with some noticeable stutter. We also hit the double 100% at times, maxing out the CPU and GPU simultaneously. Dropping down to high settings cleared up the stutter completely while keeping the game looking gorgeous.
Cucumbers, asparagus and fruit.
Finally, we've arrived at the current decade with 2020's Cyberpunk. A decently challenging benchmark for many rigs, so I really didn't know how this was going to run, or if it would even run at all to be honest, but it did. However, we did have a CPU bottleneck for the first time. Turning the graphical settings from low to medium actually made little difference to our frame rate, considering we're actually CPU bound here. I've seen this before on Cyberpunk, but on the bright side, we still achieved a completely playable experience on a CPU that was nearly a decade old when this game dropped. Medium settings with no resolution scaling seems to be the sweet spot, yielding around 30 FPS whilst driving and upwards of 35 FPS during shootouts. Now on to GTA Enhanced, and yes, it's technically a 2025 release on PC, but I'm putting it here because we all know it's pretty well optimised and built off what was originally a 2013 game. We hopped onto an online lobby for this test, and with close to max settings we saw our CPU usage outpace the GPU. Regardless, we could achieve 55 FPS when cruising around the city tormenting NPCs, and 65 plus in other scenarios like flying. A pretty standard GTA Enhanced experience, and it's good to know that it handles it fine. We're now approaching the hardest games that we'll test on this system, and next up was the excellent Hogwarts Legacy from 2023, and this is one that genuinely shocked me. Our mostly 2011 build actually coped with Hogwarts Legacy remarkably well. We started on Ultra, and during the intro and wandering around the castle corridors, things were surprisingly decent. However, the castle is a bit of a scenic trap, it's not exactly indicative of the wider world, and we also did hit some stuttering at times. You'll also notice the RAM gasping for air here. This was the exact memory hog that bullied us into upgrading our RAM in the first place. Once we made the trip to Hogsmeade, those ultra settings dragged us kicking and screaming down to the mid-20s with some stuttering also, so dropping to low was definitely the right play here. I have to admit, I'm usually a bit of a skeptic when it comes to frame generation, but turning on Intel's version here and it was like black magic. It pushed us north of 60 FPS and honestly I didn't notice any input lag. Have a look at this side by side and let me know in the comments if you can actually spot a difference or if I've just gone blind. Either way, it's entirely playable. Not bad for a CPU that some Reddit users have branded only fit for office work.
Accio.
And now for the final test, a 2026 AAA game. I booted up the newly released Forza Horizon 6. Playground Games states that the absolutely minimum spec is an 8th gen i5 and a GTX 1650. Our 2nd gen CPU was sweating just reading that, but developer specs usually play it pretty safe and I was willing to wager that we could coax a playable 60 FPS out of this on low settings. So put your seatbelt on and let's find out. Of course we went straight to Ultra first. Perhaps a touch ambitious, but scientific research into old tech demands risk. It ran but at a less appealing 20 FPS. Medium got a healthier 40 frames, and very low finally nudged us into the 60s. For a fast-paced racer, I'd absolutely sacrifice the graphics and stick to those very low settings for extra frames, especially since it still looks perfectly reasonable at 1080p. Just avoid resolution scaling like the plague. It didn't improve the frame rate at all, and it just made the game's resolution bounce around like a toddler after 3 litres of Dr. Pepper. It was definitely better just to stick to very low settings here. So, wrapping up the benchmarks and placing Grandma's upgraded fake Alienware PC on the extreme rankings, we ran it through the 5-strike benchmark. The PC managed a score of 10,514. Yes, the graphics card's doing most of the heavy lifting there, but it's a cracking result nonetheless. That puts it second in our grand leaderboard, just edging out my friend's PC that we built with the 4GB GTX 970 inside. Looking back at this little experiment with Grandma's old Dell, I'm genuinely impressed. Many people would write these old systems off as landfill, but we've just played modern releases on a machine that was built when the original iPad had just been released, and budget laptops still use single-core processors. Speaking of frustratingly low-spec laptops, in the next video we're taking a look at the first laptop I ever bought, a machine that was literally littered across every school and drab office in the UK between 2008 and 2012. I've got some serious unfinished business with this plastic slab, as I still have traumatic memories of being utterly defeated by single-digit frame rates on games that I desperately wanted to play, like Skyrim. But this time we're going back with a bit more tech know-how under the belt, armed with some major upgrades and a willingness to drag the graphics settings down until the game looks like a blobby mess running on a Nintendo 64. We're ready to give my old laptop one last chance. Not that it's got any choice in the matter. Comment below which laptop you think I'm talking about. The closest answer gets a shout out in the next video. Anyway, finishing up on Grandma's upgraded PC, and it's also worth remembering that easy access to cheap brand new tech is somewhat of a privilege. In plenty of places around the world, making do with older components isn't just a fun YouTube challenge, it's a reality. And writing off older hardware as completely useless is not only wasteful, but we've just proved that it's flat out wrong. So, as for this machine, I think I'll keep it for my bedroom. With the optical drive, it makes a brilliant little media box and casual secondary gaming PC. Having said that, will I ever play it? Because most of my time is spent testing old PC parts, so there is that. What about you? Let's say you're in the market for a system. Should you go out and buy a 2nd gen Intel system or an old Dell XPS? Well, only under two very specific conditions. Firstly, you get it for a steal. We're talking £40 to £50 max for the complete tower minus a GPU. Or secondly, like me, you're enthusiastic and extremely nostalgic about old tech. Otherwise, the eBay prices on these can be a bit of a trap. For similar money, you'd be much better off putting it towards a modern entry-level AM4 system. It gives you an actual upgrade path, whereas with this, we're firmly hitting a dead end. Lastly, a massive thank you to our awesome little community of viewers. You guys kindly hit that 15 like target on the last video. For this one, let's see if we can hit 25 likes, and all constructive comments are welcome too. Thanks so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.